I'm a military man. I did what I did only because my country had to be saved from tribalism and feudalism. If I failed, it was only because I was betrayed. The so called genocide was nothing more than just a war in defense of the revolution and a system from which we have all benefited. Mengistu Haile Mariam. Ethiopia is strategically located in the Horn of Africa, bordering Somalia, Sudan, Djibouti, Kenya, and Eritrea. The Ethiopian Revolution of 1974 was a frontier in history because it marked a significant turning point in the country's political and social standpoint. The revolution resulted in the overthrow of Emperor Haile Selassie and the establishment of a liberal state. This event was driven by a multitude of factors, including widespread poverty, economic inequality, political repression, and social unrest. Despite initial hopes for a more democratic and fair society, the revolution ultimately resulted in a period of dictatorial rule marked by human rights abuses and political repression.
The revolution erupted from September 1974 to May 1991. Roughly 1.4 million civilians were killed during the war, with 1 million of the deaths due to famine and the remainder from combat and other violence. This war was a fight between the Ethiopian military junta known as the Derg and the Ethiopian Eritrean anti-government rebels. Haile Selassie was the emperor of Ethiopia from 1930 to 1974. He was a central figure in the 20th century movement for Pan-Africanism, and he was also known for his work in modernization and anti-colonialism. He was eventually overthrown and imprisoned in a coup d'etat and died in 1975 under disputed circumstances. Official sources at the time attributed his death to natural causes, but evidence later emerged suggesting that he had been strangled on the orders of the military government that had disposed him the previous year and kept him under house arrest. Haile Selassie wanted to develop his country, but social justice was not a concept that made a great impression on him. Opinions differ over the degree to which Ethiopia's backwardness in the early 1970s was to be attributed to his policies. Unquestionably, however, the flaunting of the wealth of the aristocracy and the business class, many of the foreigners, made the poverty of the masses seem all the more terrible. David A. Korn, 1986, Ethiopia, the United States, and the Soviet Union.
Mengistu Haile Mariam was a former Ethiopian military officer and politician who served as the head of state from 1974 to 1991. He came to power after leading a military junta known as the Derg, which overthrew Haile Selassie's monarchy in 1974. During his presidency, Mengistu was accused of widespread human rights abuses and corruption, leading to a civil war in which thousands of people were killed or imprisoned. After being defeated by rebel forces in 1991, he fled the country and eventually settled in Zimbabwe, where he continues to live today.
When Ethiopian soldiers started rebelling in Negele Borana on January 12, 1974, it was generally the beginning of uprisings, which continued into February 1974. In order to demand human rights, social change, Hungarian reforms, price control, free education, the release of political prisoners, and labor demands for the fixations of wages in accordance with the price index and pensions for workers. People from a variety of occupations, starting with students, teachers, and taxi drivers, joined the strike. Ethiopia's main patron, the Soviet Union, has been pressing the Mengistu government to concede that its fight against rebel movements in Eritrea and Tigray is military unwinnable and seek a settlement. Army unit and rebels reconcile. The rebels launched a major counteroffensive that saw them retake their regional capital of Mekelle.
Today, there's food. In Asmara, the people are hungry. The city has 130,000 refugees. They exist on relief grain. There's not enough of it. Many of these people have been destitute for 6 months. They now gather for food in the Frari, which last February was a sanctuary for civilians caught in the crossfire between army and guerrillas.
In the years leading up to the revolution, Ethiopia experienced significant economic and social challenges, including widespread poverty, unemployment, and food shortages. At the same time, political repression and corruption were widespread, leading to widespread disillusionment and the emperor and his regime. The spark that ignited the revolution was widespread protests and strikes by students, workers, and others demanding political and economic reforms. The revolution was led by a coalition of leftist groups and military officers who sought to establish a socialist state. Despite initial promises of political freedom and economic equality, the new regime quickly established a repressive and authoritarian state, suppressing political opposition and violating basic human rights. The government also implemented significant reforms aimed at reducing poverty and inequality, including land redistribution and the nationalization of many industries. However, these reforms proved to be ineffective as corruption and mismanagement undermined their impact. The regime also became increasingly isolated from the rest of the world, with many countries refusing to recognize the new government or to establish diplomatic relations. This led to a period of economic decline and political repression, which ultimately resulted in the downfall of the socialist regime in 1991. But Mengistu became overconfident and launched another major operation in 1982 aimed at subduing the long-simmering insurgency in Eritrea. This attempt led to disaster, as the better organized and more popular Eritrean insurgency first beat back the Ethiopian forces, then defeated the Ethiopian army in a series of battles at the end of the 1980s that led ultimately to the fall of the Ethiopian dictatorship and the collapse of the state.
The Ethiopian Empire was replaced by a brutal communist dictatorship led by Colonel Mengistu.
A very brutal government that killed untold number of Ethiopians, that really was destroying the foundation of the nation.
They have what is called the Red Terror, where there's killing of large numbers of political opponents. At least 30,000 people are killed during that period.
Gebru Tarek explicitly asked the fascinating question: why were the Ethiopians so astonishingly successful at the counterinsurgency in the Ogaden, and so appallingly bad at it in Eritrea only a few years later? His answer is based not only on solid examinations of specific military capabilities of the Ethiopian forces and their insurgent opponents, but also on a detailed exploration of differing social, political, and economic situations of the two areas. The Ethiopians misread the nature of the Eritrean insurgency and assumed that the techniques proven in the Ogaden could be transported to the north with little change. But the world changed too. By the end of the 1980s, Ethiopia, Soviet, and Cuban sponsors had their own problems and much less attention to spare, helping Addis Ababa fight its eternal wars. The People's Democratic Republic of Ethiopia, or the PDRE, was established in February 1987 as a Marxist-Leninist one-party state upon the adoption of the 1987 Constitution, 3 weeks after approval in the national referendum. The Ethiopian Civil War ended on the 28th of May, 1991, when the Ethiopian People's Revolutionary Democratic Front, or the EPRDF, a coalition of left-wing ethnic rebel groups, entered the capital of Addis Ababa. The PDRE was later replaced with the Tigray People's Liberation Front-led Transitional Government of Ethiopia. Counterinsurgency, like any other kind of war, is an art, not a science. Success comes not from divining the correct tactical techniques or systemizing civil-military programs, but for recognizing each insurgency as a unique organism with its own causes, strengths, and weaknesses. That is a lesson that Americans would do so well to heed.